First up is Project Evolution. This creepypasta's author is unknown but was found on the Creepypasta wiki fandom page. It follows the day-by-day diary of an Eevee. They begin the story by saying that their family of Pokemon discovered evolutionary stones that held a virtually limitless power. The Eevee goes on to tell the story of its father describing the different evolutions that exist, and the Eevee is then experimented on by Professor Fur, which meant having the different evolutionary stones implanted into its spine. It was told that they were testing a theory of de-evolution. The idea was to evolve Eevee into a Vaporeon, for example, and then devolve it back into its Eevee form so it could retain the skills that it had learned from the evolution. However, it takes a dark turn when the Eevee begins hearing the inner voices of every possible evolution. The poor Eevee then began rapidly evolving throughout the different evolutions until the professor gave it a serum to put it into an unconscious state. Now, with the dilemma of having an Eevee with multiple personality disorder, their only option was to wipe its memory clean. Eevee's Grave. This creepypasta is based on a story by Flaky Porcupine and Tyron7. It's about a gamer who comes across a very sad looking Eevee. The Pokemon was sobbing while staring at its reflection in the water and looked noticeably thin. When approaching the Pokemon, a text box appeared coming from it that just kept saying loneliness. The Eevee was left by a trainer, had no family, and was left to rot in the woods. It explains that its trainer left it because during a battle all of its Pokemon were defeated and it believed that it was cursed. The trainer, trying to assist the Pokemon, walked to a nearby pond and started to fish, hoping to feed the poor Eevee. That's when the gamer begins to hear the Lavender Town tone begin to play in the background, striking fear to the gamer that something was wrong. When he rushed back to where the Eevee was, he only caught a glimpse of the buried alive character dragging Eevee to the ground. A text box then appeared that says, "Never abandon your friends," followed by, "Here lies Eevee's grave." Next up is called Let Me Evolve. This Eevee creepypasta is based on a story written by a user named Reaper the Bear on Wattpad. It's about a trainer who should have just let the Eevee evolve. He managed to find a code that placed an Eevee into his party, and through cloning he was able to create many of them and evolve them into each of the different evolutions. However, one Eevee was more stubborn than the rest. It kept trying to evolve into an evolution that he already had. He wanted it to evolve into a Flareon, but it kept trying to become an Espeon. After continuously stopping its evolution process, a text box appeared saying, "Eevee wants to evolve, let him or else." The gamer was then taken into a battle with his own Eevee, and after it defeated his Pokemon, the battle was still on with the trainer now in place. The attack text box appeared saying, "Eevee used kill." A loud screech blared from his speakers, and then his DSi just shut off. It never would turn on again after that. I guess he should have just let it evolve. Next up is Fire and Ice. This creepypasta is based on a story written by Arceus-sama found on DeviantArt.com. It's about a gamer who learns the hard way that fire and ice just don't mix. Eevee was his favorite Pokemon, and with the hopes of evolving it into a Flareon, he named it Flame. He trained and trained the Eevee until it was one of his strongest assets. While they were in the midst of the cold north, he gave the Eevee a Firestone, not realizing that the icy rock would have an effect on it. The Eevee then began to glow with a warm light of evolution, and after a happy cry it ran into the icy rock, causing it to let out a terrible cry of pain. What happened next terrified the trainer. The Pokemon now had half of its body in flames and the other half was covered by ice. Soon the flames began to slowly melt the icy half of its body, and as it fell to the ground the trainer had tears in his eyes. He should have known that fire and ice just don't go together. Next up is Dark Eevee. This creepypasta is based on a story written by a user named Shadow Aquino found on DeviantArt.com as well. It's about a trainer who came across a strange looking Eevee. It appeared to have dark grey fur and its chest looked like a shiny Eevee. There was something super dark about this Eevee though. It had slash marks across its tail and there was bones scattered nearby. Hoping to catch the Pokemon, he used the Master Ball, except to his surprise, the Eevee turned and caught the ball with its razor sharp teeth. It completely destroyed it in one bite, and with its glowing red eyes, it began lunging at the trainer. He tried to run, but as the Eevee caught up, it slashed his neck, causing his character to fall over and begin to bleed out. He began feeling a pain in his own neck, and that's most of what he remembers. Suddenly he was in a hospital bed, and as the doctor approached, he asked what happened. The boy recounted the story of the game, and as the doctor laughed, he oddly felt better. Perhaps it was all just a dream while he was blacked out from whatever happened. He noticed his mom had brought his DSi in for him to play while he was recovering, so he decided to play it. and when it loaded up, he was face to face with the Dark Eevee. A text box appeared saying, "Stay away, next time you won't be so lucky." Our first creepypasta is based on a story called Smiley, written by a user named CreepyEevee on DeviantArt.com. It's called Smiley because our protagonist finally gains an Eevee on his team, and he decides to name it Smiley, well, because little Eevee is so cute that it makes him smile. He built his team and managed to get them to the Pokemon Tower before bedtime, although because he couldn't sleep, he picks up his Game Boy and jumps back in. He hadn't seen the Pokemon Soul Silver game at night yet, so he was very excited to say the least. The first difference he noticed was that Smiley was standing in front of him, and there was no other characters around, including the usual guy who blocks the entrance to the Pokemon Tower. At first he was perplexed by this, but curiosity got the better of him and he decided to explore the tower, now that no one was guarding it. Upon entering, the screen cuts to black and a strangled Eevee cry blared through his speakers, followed by a text box appearing that read, "Get out. Get out." Then his Smiley was missing and a ghost warned him saying Smiley was one of them, get out. And as soon as he spots his Eevee, they engage in a battle. When Smiley's sprite comes up, its fur was dark gray with the tip of its tail looking torn and white. Its eyes were two glowing white circles and its smirk was now stretched across its face. When its first Pokemon came out to fight it, Smiley immediately used Cursed, which resulted in his Pokemon dying. After that, a white noise blared through his speakers while the Eevee told the trainer to, again, get out. Almost immediately his Game Boy shut itself off and refused to turn back on until the Soul Silver game was removed. This next scary Eevee Creepypasta story is based on one called Chapter 1 by an author known as Black Knight Chan on DeviantArt as well, which seems to be the only place for Eevee Creepypastas, but nonetheless, here's how it goes. It involves another creepy interaction with the game Soul Silver. When the protagonist loaded it up, the writing for the game title seemed darkened and splattered with blood. The gamer entered Bellsprout Tower with his Espeon and his Umbreon, where he was shocked to find pixelated pools of blood where each of the NPCs used to stand. The gamer loved creepypastas and had heard about hack games before, so they kept exploring hoping to find something else. A text box soon appeared that said, "You are responsible for my death." The music then turned into a slowed down demonic version of the Lavender Town theme, and in front of him was an Eevee. Except it wasn't just any normal Eevee. It was an Eevee from Pokemon Fire Red that he used to have in his party. I say used to because this Eevee had died in battle and was never recovered before he started playing Soul Silver. They entered into a battle and the Eevee looked zombie-like. Its eyes were blank, its fur was torn in places showing the bone, and the blood from its torn ear would make anyone feel sick. The Eevee attacked first, biting the Espeon, resulting in it not being able to move. Slowly its health bar declined, and then as the screen flashed white, the Espeon began looking just like the zombie Eevee. Soon the same thing happened to the Umbreon, and the Eevee had turned his party into Pokemon zombies. He immediately shut off his 3DS, never to pick it up again, for fear that his Pokemon would turn him as well. This next Eevee Creepypasta is based on a story written by a user named Somimatsu, and it's called Win or Lose. The protagonist loved his Eevee and would always use it to battle his friend, but because his friend had legendary Pokemon, he would always lose. His mother believed her son was addicted to playing Pokemon, so threw away his DS, but he managed to save the Heart Gold cartridge. Years later, he managed to buy his own DS and began replaying his Heart Gold game. He never forgot about losing to his friend, so for the sake of nostalgia, he challenged him again. And when the Eevee fainted, both of their games froze, and a text box appeared on his friend's DS that said, "I want a rematch," in all caps. Confused by this, they selected yes. What happened next shocked them both. The Eevee began disemboweling his friend's legendary Pokemon. He told Somi to stop this madness, but there was nothing they could do. The Eevee didn't stop, and then a text box then read, "Win or lose, you'll never see your beloved Pokemon again." This next Eevee Creepypasta is based on a story called Evolution Era written by a user named Derek the Vaporeon. The protagonist creates their very own Pokemon sprite, which is a mix of some of the evolutions from Eevee, and they decided to call it the Umbrespion. The sprite was a dream of his, but could never become a reality because of the limits of the game. However, while playing Pokemon, he got an odd message from his Eevee that read, "Master, I just heard that you want your dream to become a reality." Confused by this, he hit yes. Nothing happened at first, but when he entered into some tall grass, he encountered a wild Espeon. The Eevee was level 99, so it made quick work of the Espeon. The Eevee then took on an enormous amount of XP though, which was confusing, and then immediately entered into another battle, started with an Umbreon. The same thing happened, and as the screen flashed rapidly, his Eevee began evolving on its own. It soon became the Umbrespion that he had imagined, and every NPC in the game seemed terrified of this new Pokemon and would avoid him at all costs. Wanting to test its powers, he entered into the tall grass yet again, except oddly enough it said a wild dream and a wild reality had appeared. The Pokemon named Dream was an Umbreon, except its eyes were hollow, and the Pokemon referred to as Reality was an Espeon, with pitch black eyes and crying blood. The wild Dream used Perish Song, but it said a dream cannot perish. Then the wild Reality used Foresight, but nothing happened. The battle continued and his Umbrespion used Destiny Bond. The wild Reality refused its destiny, but it was forced to. The protagonist felt the game was doing this on its own almost, and like he had no control. Disturbed, he watched on as it continued. The wild Dream fainted into nothing. The wild Reality used Tears of Pain. And what were all of these moves that he was seeing? Why were they doing these actions? Soon the wild Reality fainted. He turned off his DS and began crying until he fell asleep. And when he woke up, he had hoped that it was all just a terrible nightmare, but when he turned on his game and hit continue, the Umbrespion was there, and it just said, "Welcome back, Master. Can we defeat the wild Dream now?" Last but not least, I bring you one final Eevee Creepypasta based on a story written by a user named Arceus Samia. It's titled Umbreon's Mirror and involved a demonic Umbreon. In Ilex Forest, there used to be a lake known as Mirror's Edge Lake, and many Pokemon warned the Umbreon never to visit the lake, for that is where their species disappeared. One day the Umbreon's evilings ran off, and while searching for them, the Umbreon came across the Mirror's Edge Lake. It felt thirsty, so it decided to stop for a moment, but when it peered into the lake, its reflection leaped from the water, pulling it in, and out came an Umbreon, but a more possessed looking Pokemon, one that was not the loving mother of its Eevees. Its eyes were demonic, its fur was dark, and when she found an Eevee, the Umbreon began counting 102, 103, 104, 105, 106, 107, and now you shall be 108. It used a Spirit Bomb, destroying its own Eevee, only to return to the lake, waiting for the next trainer, the next Eevee, to consume their soul and live on in Ilex Forest. Travelers beware.
Number 5, Immediately Die. From the author Sanzo fanfictions on Wattpad, this author was at his friend's house. Him and his friend had been trading for hours, and when the author needed to leave, they made one final trade. "My Pikachu for your Eevee?" His friend said that, and then they agreed. They traded, but when he did, a message appeared on screen saying, "You'll regret that. You'll regret what you did." After he left, he got a text from his friend reading, "That Eevee you sent me is acting weird. It keeps saying it doesn't want to fight." The next day, the author went back over to try to figure it out for himself. The text on screen did indeed say, "I don't need to fight," but then it said Eevee learned to immediately die. He showed this to his friend, and his friend snatched the DS from his hands and proceeded to use the move. The animation was similar to Slash, but first Eevee had taken out a sword and ran at the opposing Pokemon. When you could see the Pokemon again, his eyes were dark and bloodshot, and there was blood pouring out of his mouth and pooling on the ground. It had its neck snapped as well. It smiled though, and it had very sharp teeth. It stumbled backwards and text appeared on screen saying, "Game over, you died," and then the screen went black. They stopped playing Pokemon, but years later they laughed about the experience and blamed their imaginations. When they went back to play, they played the same game. The game loaded and said, "You are unable to play, you died. Game over, you died. Immediately die." The screen flashed and the author's friend passed out. The thing is, his friend never woke up. When I read this, I felt like I was watching a horror movie. Not because it was intense or suspenseful, but because I kept yelling at the characters not to do stupid crap. Like, come on, really? A move appears called Immediately Die and you decide that it's a good idea to use it? Then you go back to the same game years later? All of these people in these creepypastas are idiots, I swear. Number 4, The Secret Evolution of Eevee. Coming from Lucas Veda on Taringa, this creepypasta is originally in Spanish, but luckily Google Chrome has the ability to translate pages, so I've had to modify some parts because the literal translation is a little rough in English. The author was playing a Pokemon Red emulator on his PC and was about to take on Misty. He wanted to look around for people handing out items and such first, however, to help in the fight. When he entered one house, the house was empty. No sprites, no bookshelves, no furniture, nothing. After he took one step further, an old man appeared in front of him. "I have found a mysterious egg. Do you want it?" Obviously, the author said yes, despite the very creepy circumstances. "Take it and never return." As soon as he says this, the author began to spin around as if he had been using an escape rope and was brought outside outside of the house. The house was also gone. The egg hatched immediately and an Eevee popped out. No nickname option was given and it was put into his party instantly. The Eevee that entered his party was level 25 and was holding an item that was named Raise Stone plus Water Stone plus Fire Stone plus Dark Stone equals Definitive Evolution. The user saved his game and went back to sleep. The next day he launched up the game and it was all real. He wanted to put Eevee away, but Eevee did not want to go into the PC. When he tried releasing it, the game said Eevee does not want to leave. The author gave up trying and went on playing. By the time he gets to the flying type gym, Eevee had pushed itself into the front of the party. They fight the first boy and Eevee is almost fainted, but the text said that Eevee wanted to win. The author used a move called Inner Darkness and the screen went black, then red, then black again. The Pidgey he was fighting was dead and the child screamed at the author. The Eevee then turned to the author and said, "Are you proud of me?" smiling with sharp teeth and a bloody mouth. Number 3. Pokepocalypse. This unknown author from videogamecreepypasta.tumblr.com is what some people might call a hacker. He creates ROMs of games after adding a few levels or more content, and he had started this with Pokemon Leaf Green. Since it was the last Pokemon ROM he was able to make, he wanted to make it special, so he changed the game entirely to revolve around a Pokemon apocalypse, and wanted to make Eevee the main character of the game. He made Eevee only able to evolve with a Moonstone and prevented all other evolutionary forms. This evolution was called Dark Eevee and only knew the move Curse. After all was done, he plugged the ROM into his Visual Boy Advance on his computer and started playing. The game started normally and the only starter was Eevee, but the professor started talking about depressing things the author never programmed him to say. When battling the rival, the Eevee knew 3 moves: Perish Song, Frustration, and Pain Split, none of which the author had programmed. Eventually, the author found a Moonstone and was able to evolve Eevee. At first, the Eevee was confused, but then asked, "Please don't change me, don't you like the way I am?" But being the idiot he is, as he admits, the author tried one more time. The Dark Eevee looked the way the author designed, except with bloody tail and ears, and a murderous expression on its face. How can you see a murderous expression in someone's face, let alone a Pokemon's face? Just wondering. He then fought Eradicate and Eevee fought without command, killed Eradicate and looked up at his master. "What's wrong, master? You created me. Do you not like the way I am?" After closing the game, Dark Eevee finds any way to see his master. And while you're hearing this video, it's probably finding a way to see you too. Number 2. Just Eevee. This author named Spotted Leaf, not Unlisted Leaf, on quotive.com said that Eevee is their favorite Pokemon. Well, it was. Having an action replay and wanting to test it out, they loaded up Pokemon Platinum and chose Turtwig. They went out to catch an Eevee and did so easily. The Eevee was female with a hardy nature and knew all the moves a normal Eevee would have. The author caught only 3 other Pokemon, one to be an HM slave. Eventually it got to a point where all team members who could evolve needed to for the sake of not using so many items. They evolved their Bidoof, Turtwig, and then they got to Eevee. They didn't want to evolve Eevee because it was too cute, so they deposited it in their PC. They then went to catch either Dustox or a Beautifly, and caught a Dustox. The author beat the league and saved the game. They didn't play for a while, but when they went back to it a short time later, the only available box in the PC was box 13, and had Eevee and for some reason a random egg. The author went to select the egg, but the screen turned black. When it came back, the egg was gone and the cursor was on Eevee. They tried to leave the PC, but the game wouldn't let them, or maybe it was something else not letting them. They brought Eevee into their party, but their Dustox was missing. He gets into a battle with Mantike and Eevee is sent out, which is odd since it wasn't the first in the party. The author checks their party and all of their Pokemon are paralyzed. The author tries to catch Mantike, but Professor Rowan said that this is not a time to use Pokeballs. They tried once more and actually caught the Mantike. However, when they checked the PC, it wasn't there. The author exited the PC and Eevee was standing beside them. It spoke and said, "You will love me and only me," and proceeded to start a battle. The author sent out Torterra and it was unable to move due to fear. The Eevee used Slash and killed Torterra. The author refused to send out another Pokemon, but the Bidoof HM slave was dragged out. The Eevee laughed and said, "You know what happens next." The Eevee killed Bidoof as well and asked the author to promise they will love her and only her. The author said no and Eevee used Slash. The game shut off and said that their save file is corrupted. Number 1. Spectorion. This unknown author from the Creepypasta wiki heard about a rumor that seemed to be in the same vein as Mew hiding under the truck. A hidden Pokemon evolution that was only accessible with Eevee and that could only occur after the Pokemon died. Curious by this, the author did some more research and found that Spectorion was a combination of the Eevee souls lost either during failed evolutions or when their trainer couldn't get to a Pokemon Center in time. Being curious and loving ghost type Pokemon, he decided to give it a shot. He knew that Pokemon has had some dark things in the past, such as Hypno leading kids into the forest or breeding between Pokemon and humans as suggested by the books in Pokemon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. However, this was something else. The trainer caught an Eevee and brought it to level 50, constantly letting it fade to bring its friendship down to 0. As soon as it started to not obey, he brought it to the Elite Four. He let the Eevee faint and continued battling, never reviving until he fought the champion once more. After the battle, he got a message saying Eevee has died and was brought to a Pokemon Center immediately. Nurse Joy said, "We have tried all we could. We're so sorry for your loss," and gave him back his Eevee. The text appeared on screen saying, "Oh," as if an egg had started hatching. He was brought to an evolution screen where the lifeless corpse of Eevee remained. It fell apart and a ghostly vision appeared, with glowing white eyes and a red circle on its head. The colors of its fur appeared inverted and it looked angry. "How could you let me die?" it asked without leaving the screen. "You will pay." As the screen faded away, all the trainers in the Pokemon Center were surrounding the user and Spectre Eon was floating behind them. It said to do it, and all the other patrons proceeded to beat the author until the screen went black. The whole time they were asking, "How could you let it die?" This creepypasta is named Prevention of Evolution. It was an ordinary Saturday afternoon. I was on my DSi playing Soul Silver. I was currently in Goldenrod City with my Typhlosion, named Titan, right behind me. I had my Action Replay DSi in with a new code on, a code that would let you get a shiny Eevee. I found it while looking around on the internet one day, and I just had to try it because I love shiny Eevees. I made my character walk up to the Pokemon Center and walked up to the PC. The code I had was supposed to make the shiny Eevee appear in box 5. Before pressing the R and L buttons, I made sure that there were no Pokemon in that box. After moving any Pokemon that were in box 5 to another box, I went to box 4 and pressed the buttons simultaneously. Then I returned to box 5 and sitting there was a shiny Eevee. The Eevee was oddly named E, and it was level 1. Its moves were Tackle, Swift, Takedown, and Bite. I shrugged off the old name and put E in my party. I was going to trade him into my Heart Gold since I play that more often. I also had a cloning code for it, which I could use to gain more shiny Eevees, to get all the shiny evolutions. I grabbed my other DSi and turned it on. I proceeded to start up my save file and move my character into the Union Room, along with my character on Soul Silver. After the trading process was done, I saved both games and turned off both systems. I took my Action Replay out of the DS with Soul Silver and put it into the other. I turned it on and activated the cloning code. Once I put E in my PC, I proceeded to clone him. I then later got all the evolutions except for Flareon. I shrugged, I can get Flareon later. I saved my game and turned it off. I then took my Action Replay out and put it back in my other DS along with Soul Silver. I started up my game and proceeded to get another shiny Eevee. One more time, I said to myself as I once again pressed the R and L buttons and moved to box 5. Again it was named E and had the same moveset as the last one. I moved E into my party then closed out of the PC. I remembered that I turned on the max XP code on my Action Replay so I could train Eevee. I opened my bag and looked for an XP share. I found one and gave it to E. I moved my character out of the Pokemon Center and went to go look for wild Pokemon. As soon as I left Goldenrod City, I went into the first patch of grass I saw. I walked around until a wild Pokemon appeared. A wild Rattata appeared. Go Titan. I tapped attack then return. Titan used return. The wild Rattata fainted. As the Pokemon disappeared from the screen, I held down the R buttons. E continued gaining levels until it was about level 32. As I went back to the overworld, I opened up my party and switched E to the front, so I could battle with him. A wild Abra appeared. Go E. I tapped on attack, then bite, seeing as it could be super effective against the psychic type Pokemon. E used bite. It's super effective. The wild Abra fainted. I pressed R again and watched as E proceeded to gain more levels. It went on until it reached level 57, but before returning to the overworld, it went through the evolution screen. There I saw E. What? E is evolving. I waited around for a moment to see what it was trying to evolve into, and it was trying to evolve to an Espeon. I pressed the B button to stop the evolution, being that I already had a shiny Espeon, and the normal text of "What? E stopped evolving" came on screen. I returned to the overworld and my character was facing E. ... appeared above its head, and a text box came up. E wants to evolve. I shake my head and ignore the text, thinking that it was only an odd interaction. I proceeded to fight more and more wild Pokemon until E was up to level 72. Every time I came out of a wild battle, E would try to evolve into Espeon. I kept pressing B to stop the evolution until something strange happened. A text box comes up as E's sprite jumps up and down and emits an Eevee cry. E wants to evolve. Let him or else. Yes or no options come up. My hand was shaking as I slowly moved my stylus away from the screen. I nervously clicked on no. E's sprite jumps up and down as the angry icon appeared over its head. A loud Eevee cry blasted through the speakers of my DS, causing me to jump from the sudden outburst. A text box comes up. If you refuse to let me evolve, I'll force you into it. I was then taken into a Pokemon battle. E is attacking. Go Titan. Titan's cry sounded as if he was on low health, although his health bar was full. E's sprite looked as if it was angry. The sprite showed his claws, outstretched, and was gritting his teeth. I gulped and tapped attack, then eruption. Titan used eruption. E avoided the attack. E violently attacked Titan. The attack animation played as though E was using slash over and over again. It kept going on as Titan's health slowly started to decrease, and though each slash I could hear my poor Typhlosion crying out. It only stopped after Titan's health dropped to 0. Titan was mercilessly attacked over and over, the text said. As Titan's sprite disappeared, a pool of crimson red was left behind, and my DS suddenly turned off. What just happened left me stunned. I sat there with my eyes wide open, I clenched my DS in my hands, and as I slowly moved my thumb over to the power button and pressed it. Oddly, right after I turned my DS back on, Soul Silver immediately started back up. I skipped the opening scene and went to the title screen. I nearly screamed at what I saw. The ocean that Lugia swam in was blood red, and the music was distorted and terrible. Lugia had scars and gashes over it, and the poor thing looked terrified. I pressed the start button and looked over my save file. This is what it read. Name, Klaus. Playtime, 666:66. Badges, 16. Pokédex, 666. I wanted to throw my DS against the wall, but curiosity took over me and I hesitantly pressed the A button to continue my file. The world I was in looked like Ilex Forest, only the grass and trees were crimson red in color. There were Pokemon organs scattered all around the area. They were even hanging from the trees. I moved my character around, but he was moving much slower than usual and couldn't run. After I looked around the area, I heard what sounded like a Typhlosion cry, and the text box came up, "Typhlosion is suffering." That surprised me. I thought my dear Typhlosion was dead. I shook my head and tried to ignore it as I traveled through the bloody Ilex Forest. Things got more horrifying. There were bones everywhere along with organs. The bones had flesh rotting off of them. The water was a blood red color and it was making me feel sick to my stomach. I continued on until I was no longer in control of my character. He continued to walk forward until what looked like an overworld shiny Eevee sprite was right in front of him. Only the sprite had shiny Espeon ears and a tail to go along with it. The eyes, ears, and tail were bleeding, not to mention the eyes were glowing red. There was also the jewel of an Espeon in the Eevee's forehead. A distorted mixture of Espeon and Eevee's cry played and I was taken into a wild Pokemon battle. Eevee is attacking. Go Titan. I was shocked at the two sprites. Titan was a dark green and dark orange color with pitch black flames, and the Eevee/Espeon from earlier stood there with a hideous grin on its face. I examined Titan more closely. His eyes were black with red pupils, there was flesh exposed everywhere on his face, his spine was coming out of his back, and the tears in his back in which the bone was coming out were bleeding terribly. There was a hole in his neck and his stomach, in which his organs were exposed, and it looked as if a large amount of intestine was coming out of his stomach. One part of his right arm was torn off and exposed bone. His eyes, nose, and mouth were bleeding. I nervously moved my stylus over attack and tapped it. Titan had all the same moves, only they were all dark type. I clicked on Flamethrower. Titan used Flamethrower. The flames emitted from its mouth were pitch black, just like the flames on its neck. E's health dropped only slightly. You should have let me evolve. This is what you get for preventing me. E used Kill. Titan was mercilessly torn apart. Titan was killed. Titan's sprite disappeared from the screen, leaving a large pool of crimson red. I was back in the overworld. Titan's body was torn apart and the limbs were sitting right next to E, as the head and abdomen were floating in a pool of crimson red. E started to slowly advance towards my character. I'm not done yet. The screen went to black, and all I could hear was what sounded like slash. It went on continuously, the sound getting louder and louder until it eventually stopped. I was taken back to the overworld, only to see that my trainer had suffered the same fate as Titan. E's sprite jumped up and down and that hideous distorted cry played again. Now go rot with your precious Typhlosion, you fool. With these words, the screen faded to black and I could no longer do anything. I sat there for a while until the DS turned itself off, but not without playing E's distorted cry one more time. I threw my DS against the wall and started sobbing. I will no longer look at shiny Eevees in the same way, ever again.